You never know when you have to have your gospel tool belt on and ready to go. Recently, I was in a Home Depot, and I was looking for a particular plate, a wall plate, and I was in the electronics section, and I couldn't find the one that I needed. And all of a sudden, one of the helpful Home Depot men comes along with a big smile on his face, and he asked me if I needed any help. And I explained to him the type of plate that I needed, and he goes, "I know exactly where it is." So he took me over, quickly found the plate, and I said, "That's it. That's what I need." Now, the interesting thing is that Tonga was from Hawaii, and he was a very, very talkable kind of a guy. And so he spent the next, without exaggeration, 25 minutes talking to me about his hobbies. He told me about his hiking, about his skydiving, about his traveling around the country and the world. He even told me about how he is going back to college to learn more about electronics so he can be more helpful around the store. And his point was, he says, you always have to be flexible. You have to know things. You have to be kind of like a Renaissance man. And so I stood there for 25 minutes listening to him talk. And so finally, when I saw that he took a breath, I thought, well, now's my opportunity. So I said, I had my gospel tool belt on, and I said, "Tonga, thank you for sharing all of that. Have you ever thought about, in all of the variety of things that you want to learn, have you ever thought about how God fits into that? How religion fits into that? Do you have any type of religion? Do you believe in God?" And so he immediately goes, "Yes, I'm LDS. I'm Mormon." So all of a sudden, I kind of think about reaching into my gospel tool belt, as I've talked to many Mormons in the past, and I'm going to pull out the one question that I always ask Mormons. Now, before I get to the question, some of you may know some of the Mormon theology. They believe in 3 different levels of heaven. The first level, the so-called celestial kingdom, anybody can go there. The whoremongers and the murderers can go to the first level of heaven. The so-called second level of heaven is where good people go. You don't even have to believe in God, you just have to be a good person. Now, the Mormon level, the third level, the celestial kingdom, is where the obedient Mormons go. And the Mormons teach that you have to keep celestial law. In other words, you have to keep all of God's law in order to get to the celestial heaven, the highest heaven. So I pulled the question out of my gospel tool belt, and I asked Tonga, I said, "Tonga, can you get to the celestial kingdom by grace alone?" Now, the Mormons would say, for the first 2 levels of heaven, the answer would be yes. You don't have to do anything. You're automatically going to go to one of those 2 levels of heaven. But to get to the 3rd level of heaven, to even ask the question, is incoherent. It's silliness to Mormons, because you have to keep celestial law in order to get to the celestial kingdom. And so I've never had a Mormon give me just a really strange look, and this is what Tonga did. He gives me a strange look, and he says, "Well, of course not." He says, "You have to keep celestial law. You have to keep all of God's law to get to the celestial kingdom." And so I asked him the obvious question. I said, "How are you doing with that? How have you kept the law? Have you kept all of the law?" In fact, James chapter 2, verse 10 says, if you break just one part of God's law, you're guilty of breaking it all. So Tonga did a very interesting thing at that point. He looked at his watch, and he said, "I'm not allowed to discuss religion at work." Now, think of the irony of that. He just spent 25 minutes telling me about all of his other interests and his hobbies and everything, but he can't discuss religion at work. And so I asked Tonga, I said, "Tonga, you just spent the last 25 minutes telling me about all these other things. What does your work think about that? You just used 25 minutes of work to do this." And so I said, "But you know what? I understand. is it possible that you and I could exchange phone numbers and we could meet for lunch sometime and further this discussion? No, I don't think so. How about if I give you my email? We could further this discussion. No. I really don't want to talk about religion. I can't talk about it at work, and I really don't want to talk about it. So he went from being this affable guy, all of a sudden, very friendly, wanting to talk about all these things, not wanting to talk about anything when it came to religion. So the point is that we need to be ready to share the gospel in season and out, as Paul told Timothy. We always have to have our gospel tool belt on, and we have to have a question ready to pull out. And even though there was no further discussion about that between me and Tonga, hopefully I put a stone in his shoe. Hopefully he'll be thinking about it later that day or later that week. Well, what did he really mean by, can you get to the celestial kingdom by grace alone? And maybe he thought about that. So let's just be ready to have our gospel tool belt on at all time and let God do the work.